Hey there and welcome back to the podcast, and in this episode we're going to talk about one of my favourite subjects, and that is how to use mental rehearsal to create positive changes in your life. Because I think deep down everyone has things that they want to change in their lives, right? Even though they maybe don't want to admit it publicly. So we're talking blocks, barriers, emotional issues, destructive behaviours, things that prevent them from getting more of what they want. But the problem is we've never been taught how to make those changes. We've been given this incredible device, our brain. It can do amazing things, but we've not been given a user manual. So most of us fiddle about trying to get it to do things that we want it to do, but it seems to have a mind of its own, and as a result, change for many people feels difficult, if not impossible. But what if there was a way to unlock your brain's potential? To be able to use your mind to create specific positive changes in your life and to do it deliberately by design. Well, you'll be glad to know that there is such a thing, and the key to all of it is much closer than what you think. So grab a cuppa or whatever you do when you're listening to your podcasts, and let's get started. Hey there and welcome to the Stress Less Living podcast. My name is Stephen Burns and I've been a practicing coach, trainer and hypnotherapist for 25 years. Each week I'll share easily digestible bite-sized ideas that you can immediately put into practice so that you can live a more harmonious and balanced life. Because life is challenging, but whatever we encounter, we always have a choice. We can take the easy routes or the hard routes, the low stress way or the high stress way. Well, the Stress Less Living podcast is about always looking for the easy routes in life, the low stress ways to accomplish your goals, get more of what you want, and ultimately live a happy and more effortless life. So if you're looking for the perfect antidote for the chaos of modern life, my friend, you are absolutely in the right place. So in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the power of mental rehearsal and how it can be used to create lasting personal change. And the first thing I want to do is bust a bit of a myth. So mental rehearsal, first of all, is where you use your imagination to play through something you're about to experience. And it's commonly used in sports psychology. So athletes will imagine an up-and-coming performance going really well. They imagine it going exactly the way that they want it to go. And this can help prepare them psychologically for that performance. Now, whenever you talk about mental rehearsal, most people instantly assume that you're talking about visualization, where you picture something clearly inside your mind. And this can totally freak some people out and prevent them from using this amazing technique because they think they can't visualize, or they're not good at it, or in very rare cases, they have something called aphantasia that prevents people from visualizing. So I want to clarify this. I want to bust this slight myth. When I talk about using your imagination like this, doing mental rehearsal, it doesn't just mean visualizing. It encompasses all the senses, or as many as you've got. So we're talking the pictures and movies that you make inside your mind. We are talking about visualization, but we're also talking about the sounds that you hear, how you speak to yourself through your internal conversations, and also the feelings and sensations that you experience in your body. And actually, visualization is not the most important out of these. The most important is actually the last one, your feelings and sensations. And I'll talk a bit about why that's the case towards the end of the episode. So if you're struggling to visualize, don't worry about it. First of all, it does get better with practice. And secondly, there are other channels that you can focus on. And ultimately, the goal is to be able to use your imagination to create a feeling, a visceral sensation of something in your neurology. And you don't need to see something inside your mind with crystal clarity to do that. So I just wanted to get that out of the way for those of you who are listening that don't do visualization that well. It's not that big of a deal. First of all, it will get better over time with practice. And secondly, it's not the only channel that you can use, and it's also not the most important one. So why is using your imagination in this way such a powerful way to create change? Well, it's because imagination is one of the main vehicles that we use to create neural pathways inside the brain. and also to communicate to our subconscious mind. A lot of people, when they try to make some kind of change, they attempt to use logic and reason to convince themselves into that change. I don't know if you've ever tried this, I'm sure you have at some stage, and it almost never works. You just end up in a head spin and it leads nowhere. But if you were to imagine the change richly and intensely in your imagination, using all the senses, and really feel what it would be like to experience that change inside your body viscerally, then you'll begin to create neural pathways inside your brain that support that change. It's like you're giving your brain a set of instructions. So there's a famous example that backs this up that was carried out at Harvard University in 1994 to improve performance in basketball. So what they did was they divided a team into two groups. Group number 1 were asked to practice shooting free shot throws. Group number 2 were asked to imagine throwing the perfect free shot throw, what that would look like, what it would feel like inside their body when they were jumping in just the right position, and what it would sound like when the ball slotted into the basket. And they then tested both of the groups for growth, and they found that both of them experienced the same rate of development, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, because Group 2 hadn't even been physically practicing. They were just practicing in their imagination. Pretty incredible. There was also another study where they got basketball players to both physically practice and use mental rehearsal over a 10-week period, and they found that this group experienced significantly higher levels of performance than players who only did physical practice. So this is amazing when you think about it. It means that if you can imagine something, it then becomes a choice to you. It's like you are sending signals to your brain, which is incredible. It opens up the door to unlimited possibilities. So I want to give you an experience of this because it's one thing for me to talk about it and give you some examples. I think it's another much more powerful thing if you actually experience it. So if you've done some of my online courses or watched some of my videos, then you'll have likely seen this before, but it's well worth experiencing again. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to stand up. Now, obviously, if you're driving while you're listening to this, don't try to stand up as if you would. Wait until you've got the time and space to do it. But I'd like you to stand up and position yourself so that your feet are shoulder width apart and just allow your arms to fall by your sides. And then what I'd like you to do is to lift one of your arms up, your dominant one preferably, and put it out in front of you so that it's at a 90-degree angle to your body. And then I'd like you to start to rotate from your hips, keeping your arm straight, stretched out in front of you. So your arms should come with you as you rotate round. So you want to make sure that you're rotating from the hips. Your feet should stay in the same place, so no cheating. If you want a visual for this, I've included some photos of me doing it. You'll find those in the show notes just in case you're finding this difficult to picture. So I want you to keep rotating, bringing your arm with you that's stretched out in front of you at a 90-degree angle to your body, and eventually you'll reach your limit as far as you can stretch round. And when you reach that point, I want you to make an imaginary chalk mark on the wall just so that you can remember where your limit is. So once you've done that, I want you to then bring your arm round, put it back down next to your side, and then close your eyes. And what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to imagine what you just did a moment ago. So I'd like you to see your arm stretched out in front of you, so don't physically do it. Just imagine what it would be like if you saw your arm stretched out in front of you, what that would look like, what it would sound like, and what it would feel like. And then I want you just to imagine stretching round. So imagine rotating from the hips, bringing your arm with you, and I want you to rotate round all the way to that chalk mark. And then I want you to keep rotating past it. So I want you just to notice what it's like as you rotate from the hips in your imagination, and you see, hear and feel your arm going way past that chalk mark, maybe a foot past it, or a metre or 2 metres, or even more. In fact, I'd like you just to keep rotating until you go almost 360 degrees inside your mind. And I know that might seem a little bit strange, but just do whatever you need to do to represent that in your imagination. So I want you just to finish off doing that. If you need a wee bit more time, you can pause the podcast and just to imagine this as vividly as you possibly can inside your imagination. And again, you want to include all the senses when you do this. Then when you're ready, I want you just to come all the way back to the here and now, open your eyes, and I want you to physically stretch again. So bring up your arm, 90 degrees angle from your body in front of you, and start to rotate round from the hips again, following your hand, following your arm. Only this time, I want you just to notice how you go so much further beyond your initial chalk mark. How much further can you stretch now? That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Most people, when they do this, obviously I'm not in the room with you, I can't see what you're doing, but most people, when they do this, they stretch way beyond that initial chalk mark. It's like all of a sudden they've become way more flexible. Hey, who needs yoga when you can just do this inside your mind? So this is pretty crazy. And if you weren't in a position to try that there, make sure you do it when you get back in your house or wherever suitable, because it is a pretty mind-blowing exercise. So why does that happen? Why do you stretch past your chalk mark after you've imagined it? Well, there's a couple of explanations. The first one is the neural pathway explanation that I mentioned earlier. So every time you imagine something, then you create a neural pathway inside your mind, and the more you imagine it, the stronger that pathway becomes. So by imagining what it would be like if you were to stretch way past that chalk mark, you created a neural pathway that supported that change. So that's the first explanation. The second explanation is the idea that you already had the capability to stretch that far, but you placed fake limitations on yourself. And by using your imagination, it allowed you to bypass those limitations. So which of these explanations is correct? Well, I think they're both correct to a certain degree, but what it does show is just how powerful your imagination can be. So how does this relate to making positive psychological changes in your life? Well, it's the foundation of all of it. One of the reasons why we stay stuck is because we can't imagine what it would be like to not be stuck. But when you do imagine it, it unlocks that choice and all of a sudden it becomes an option. It's like you've opened a doorway to a new way of experiencing the world. So let's put this into something practical. So you can use this idea to create positive changes in 3 easy steps. Hey there, if you are enjoying this episode and you'd like to learn more about the fundamentals of meditation, then I have a video course that you can enroll on for free as a podcast listener. So this is normally a paid course, but as someone who listens to the podcast, you can enroll for free using the discount code in the show notes. So if you want to check out that, like I said, I'll include a link to that free meditation course in the show notes and all the information that you need. So step number 1, think of something that you want to change. So it could be a problem, an issue, a challenge of some kind, some sort of block that you're experiencing that's holding you back. Then step number 2, you want to consider what would it be like if you experienced the change that you want fully and completely. So say, for example, you were feeling anxious in the workplace. If you were to completely resolve that, what would that be like? What would it be like if you were super chilled, relaxed, while at the same time being effective and able to respond to adversity in the workplace with a cool head? Or what would it be like if you were absolutely bulletproof to all of the chaos that was going on around you? Then step number 3, you want to imagine this as richly and as intensely as you possibly can. So once you've got an idea of what that change could be like, you then want to bring it into your imagination and make it as real, as rich, and as intense as you possibly can in a way that affects your feelings. And this last part really is key. And what you'll be doing when you play this through inside your mind, when you mentally rehearse it using your imagination, you'll be creating neural pathways that support that choice, that create that change. You'll also be bypassing any fake limitations that you placed on yourself that previously prevented you from experiencing that change naturally. All of a sudden, what you've imagined becomes a choice. It's starting to become part of your neural network and hence your reality. I mean, how cool is that? And the thing is, the applications of this are limitless. To give you another example, so I actually mentioned this one in episode number 47, where I talked about NLP. So when I was a teenager, I had a lot of anxiety, especially social anxiety. I was pretty shy. I really struggled when I was in larger social settings, especially bigger groups. I didn't really know what to say. I felt super awkward, and it was just a really difficult time in my life. And then I read a book called The Hypnotic World of Paul McKenna that completely changed my trajectory. So in the book, Paul talked about NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And he outlined this technique that allowed you to take some kind of emotion. So the example he used was confidence, and then place it into a particular area of your life. And it was basically a technique where you use your imagination. So I practiced this technique over and over again. I think I did it like 3 or 4 times a day for 5 days on the run up to the weekend, because I had this thing. I was going out with friends for a few drinks and I was feeling quite nervous about it. And like I said, I repeated it over and over again throughout the week. I spent 5 days on it. And then when the weekend came, I couldn't believe the difference. I just felt amazing. I stood differently. My chest was puffed out. I looked at people in the eye. I had this incredible energy, this lovely warmth throughout my stomach and through my chest. I just felt absolutely amazing. And there was no shyness, no anxiety whatsoever. And my friends were like, what did you do to yourself? They actually thought I was on drugs. And what they said was that it was like I became someone else, someone bigger. But for me, that's not what it felt like. It felt like I was becoming more myself. I was managing to see beyond all of the angsts, the worries, the anxieties, and I could actually be myself for a change. Now, like I said, there were some extra bits to the technique I used back then that I've not covered, but the foundation of it was those 3 simple steps. Number 1, think of something you want to change. Number 2, consider what would it be like if you were to experience that change. And number 3, imagine this change. Do it richly and intensely, and do it until you really feel it as intensely as you possibly can. And then what you can do is you can repeat it, you can mentally rehearse that a few times, and that then strengthens the neural pathways and turns that choice into something more solid. So with my example, I repeated the technique several times a day for 5 days, and I think that's probably why it was so powerful. Like I said, it felt like I was on drugs. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it was just those 3 steps that created that change. When you imagine something, it then becomes a choice. So that's just a little insight into how to use mental rehearsal or your imagination to create positive change. There is a lot more I can say on this subject. We're really just scratching the surface here, but this will give you a great start. You can use those 3 steps, that little exercise, to create lots of different changes in your life. So have fun with it. Feel free to experiment. And if you want to learn more, I do have an online product called the Brain Trainers Academy. It's a massive online resource that will show you how to use your mind to create change in all manner of different ways. So I cover all kinds of things like how to influence your emotions, how to place emotions into certain areas of your life, how to let go of troublesome emotions, how to uncover and let go of limiting beliefs, how to enlist the help of your subconscious mind, and a whole host of other things. So if you want to check that out, it's super affordable. I've included a link to it in the show notes. So another thing I want to quickly add in before we finish this episode is the role of repetition and intensity. I touched on it a moment ago, but I want to dig into it a little bit deeper. So the brain creates neural pathways in 2 different ways, or 2 main ways. Number 1 is through repetition. So this is where you do something over and over again. So if I was to say to you, what's 6 times 7? Of course, it's 42. And if you're into reading the same books as me, then you'll know that that is also the secret to life, the universe, and everything. If you're into reading Douglas Adams. If you're not, then you'll be totally confused right now, so let's move on. But the reason why you could say that answer so quickly is because it's been drummed into you at school when you did your times tables. So repetition also comes into play when you're creating change using your imagination. The more you repeat something inside your mind, the stronger the pathway becomes. That's why I did that technique I mentioned earlier every day for 5 days. And the second way that neural pathways are created is through intensity. The more intense you can make something in terms of the feelings and sensations you experience, the quicker the neural pathways are formed and the sooner the change will become concrete and part of your way of being. So that's why I made the point at the start of the episode about visualization. Visualization it can be important, but it's less important than feelings and sensations. A lot of people, when they do mental rehearsal, they visualize, but they don't feel what they visualize. They're very disconnected with it. So it doesn't really do anything. The brain's not getting the signal. You've got to create a visceral sense of what you're imagining, because intensity of feeling gives the brain the signal that something is happening, change is occurring. And like I said, the more intense, the stronger the connection becomes and the quicker this neural pathway is formed. To give you an example of this, so if we take something like trauma. So trauma is where someone has an intense negative experience and connections are made inside the brain that can then create a whole host of problems for people. And often these problems only need one traumatic experience for them to be created. And the reason why is because of the intensity. Traumatic experiences are intense. So in psychology, they call this an imprint experience, something that is so intense that it makes an impact on your personality, and some aspect of you has become formed. So you're using this in a very positive way. You're creating positive imprint experiences. So as a general rule of thumb, the more intense you make it, the less repetition you need, but it's still good to use both. So that is a quick introduction to how to use mental rehearsal or your imagination to create positive change. Like I said, we are only scratching the surface. And if you want some more comprehensive training, then check out the Brain Trainers Academy. Like I said, I've included a link in the show notes. So let's do a quick review before we bring this episode to a close. So the first point I made is that mental rehearsal is not just about visualization. It's about all of the senses. And actually, visualization is not as important as feelings and sensations. So you want to create a visceral sense of the change in your experience. And the reason why this is so powerful is because it creates neural pathways in the brain. And I shared with you a very simple 3-step process to do this. So number 1, you want to think of something you want to change. Number 2, consider what would it be like if you were to experience that change. And then number 3, imagine this change richly and intensely. And you want to do it until you really feel it. And then the last point I made was the roles of repetition and intensity. The more you repeat something, the more you pattern it in, just like your times tables. But also, you want to make it as intense as you possibly can. The general rule of thumb is the more intense you make it, the less repetition you need to pattern the change in. But you still want to be using both of these vehicles. So that is us for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, if you want more information, if you want more comprehensive training on this subject, then check out the Brain Trainers Academy. I think you'll love what's on offer. So that's all for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, if you got value from it, then I'd love it if you could follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and consider leaving a review. It really does help. So enjoy the rest of your week, whatever you're doing, and I'll speak to you in the next episode.